part of history. We were making history tonight. This event is the first official public event of the Center for Story at Shenandoah University. For those of you that understandably have no idea what that is, it's still very much a work in progress. I'm Sean Murphy, and I've been brought on to help direct the center. All credit, and I'm glad he's here tonight, goes to our Dean of Arts and Sciences, Jeff Coker, whose idea this was. He and I and Kelly Crowley have been working behind the scenes on curriculum for what we hope to be an innovative and very interdisciplinary master's program in storytelling. Much more of that coming soon when we launch the website, which is also a work in progress. But really briefly, the Center for Story is what it sounds like. It's going to be a virtual and physical space where we interrogate and celebrate storytelling. And that cuts across, as we'll hear tonight, virtually every discipline, every genre. Everything's about story and narrative. And the Center for Story wants to have year-round programming, including a podcast, a blog, a speaker series, and a festival every fall, all bringing in experts from various fields to talk about how story works in the real world, how it works in the worlds they work in, et cetera. So it's a tremendous honor to be a part of this. And I couldn't think of a better way or a better person to kick this off with. Let me introduce our special guest, Dr. Shawn DuBravac. I'll read the official bio, and then I can say a few words. But we are in the presence of greatness tonight. Dr. Shawn DuBravac is an internationally recognized thought leader and top-rated keynote speaker. He delivers insights on the trends, technologies, and paradigms that are transforming the globe. He is, among many things, an economist, a futurist, an author among myriad articles, the New York Times bestseller, Digital Destiny, How the New Age of Data Will Transform the Way We Work, Live, and Communicate. Please join me in welcoming Shawn DuBravac to the stage. So by way of brief introduction, Shawn and I are not only friends, I worked with him for about a decade at the Consumer Technology Association. Just show of hands, does anyone know what the Consumer Technology Association or has heard of or been to the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas every January? Okay, so the CES, which I'm sure Shawn will be happy to talk about throughout the evening, is the biggest trade show of the tech industry. So when Shawn and I worked together, I mostly stood in his shadow and tried to learn things, but we spent day in and day out basically obsessing about how technology and innovation impact everything from business to the arts world to just day-to-day life. So on our watch, we saw digital cameras and GPS systems, like all these different devices, all slowly get consolidated into a phone. So we're old timers, but whenever I have any questions about technology or want to know, like, not just what's going on now, but what's coming up, Shawn is the guy I turn to. And as you'll see tonight, he's forgotten more than most of us will know about technology. But what I wanted to bring him in tonight, and it's funny because I was working on the introduction, like, how do I open up? And I was going to say, well, just this week, I've read a couple of articles about AI. As I was parking in my Gmail, an article came in from someone like the New Yorker, like, are we at max or peak AI? And I'm like, as I'm pulling into the parking lot are we at peak AI? So that's a question I want to ask. The only other thing I'll say before we turn it over is I want this to be informal. So as we go along, please feel free to raise your hand. We've got a microphone and you can shout out questions and comments. I don't want to wait till the end and not be able to accommodate you. So if you've got thoughts or want us to address some specific things, shout out and we'll recognize you. So Shawn, I mean, where to begin? I think I already teed it up by saying, I mean, every day, every week, there's more about AI. Let's assume that people here, for understandable reasons, maybe aren't following the trends that closely. How do we even grapple with AI? Like, what is AI and why are we even talking about it? And like, how is it impacting academia in particular?
Yeah, so I think you want to break AI up into a variety of different pieces. I think what we've been focusing on in the last 24 months is generative AI. And probably all of you know ChatGPT. How many of you used ChatGPT today? How many students are you going to use it tonight when you have to work on your homework? And so we're at this cusp of this new era of AI, especially in academia, trying to figure out, and really more broadly, all of education, in how we infuse this piece of AI into curriculum. And you've seen the full gamut. I think you look at New York City public schools; they were a great example. One of the largest public schools in the country. They shut it down at first, and then they decided that wasn't the right approach, and they opened it back up and allowed students to use it. Other school districts like Los Angeles, Chicago, both very big school districts, still have it locked down and aren't letting students use it in their classrooms or on their Wi-Fi. So when we talk about AI, the focus lately has really been on generative AI, but we've been dealing with AI for decades now, and I would argue it's finally coming to fruition, where the full power of what AI can do in a variety of different settings is finally coming to the forefront.
So to unpack it a little bit, like a lot of the stuff I've been reading, and makes perfect sense with how media likes to frame things for hits and bite, is the alarmist angle. And you, for the nonprofit I run, 1455, we have a quarterly e-zine called Movable Type. And I asked Shawn last spring when this was cutting edge. And it's just funny because we had the same conversation last May, like, man, AI is everywhere. Can you talk about it a little bit? And here we are, whatever, 6 months later, and it's only more so. But you told kind of a tale, and I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'll let you tell it, but you set up the framework of your piece talking about how, as a society, we've tended to always be afraid of new technology, no matter what it is. Talk a little bit about how you frame that so we can have a better understanding of like what we're missing with the alarmist rhetoric and some of the more hot takes.
Yeah, in that particular article, I talked about the typewriter as a new cutting edge technology. If you go back to the 1930s and you look at how they wrote about the typewriter, especially writers wrote about the typewriter, they were aghast, they were, offended, and they were concerned that the typewriter and all of the clicking and clacking that the typewriter made would disrupt the newsroom, that you wouldn't be able to write great news and write great articles because people would be on their typewriter making noise and impacting the environment there. Obviously, the typewriter didn't destroy news as we knew it, but it did change how work flowed through newsrooms. And I think that's the key. I think right now, both spectrums, both ends of the spectrum have it wrong. You hear some people saying, oh, AI is going to change everything, and genie's out of the box. It's never going to be able to go back to the way it always was. And you also have this other side that says, oh, AI is not going to change the human experience. It's not going to change things that are fundamentally human. And I would argue, both of those are wrong, that AI is fundamentally going to change what it means to be human. Generative AI will fundamentally change what it means to be human. But that doesn't mean that there isn't place to be human in that. And if you go back, any time in history, the human experience, if you go back far enough, was about hunting and gathering. All day long, you spent hunting and gathering to try to increase your nutritional take and that of your family or your community unit. And then over time, we learned how to gain economies to scale. We learned how to automate some of those things. We learned division of labor. And so now most of us spend very little amount of our day finding food, right? Especially if you're on a campus, you just go to the cafeteria and it's provided there for you, or you walk across the street to the gas station and it's there waiting for you. Ample choices, we can argue whether that's good or whether that's bad, but we spend very little amount of our time today trying to gather enough food to satisfy the calories that we're going to need to survive the night. And that was the human experience. So the human experience is fundamentally different than it once was because of technology. And so, I think people who say, oh, generative AI, it's not going to change the human experience, are looking at it too narrowly. At the same time, there is still a place for humans, especially I think when it comes to work. So in economics, we have something called the lump labor fallacy, which is the idea that work is finite and that there's only so much work to be done. And if we can satisfy that work, then then it's done, right? We've done all the work that there is to be done. But we see time and again that we create entirely new industries. We can create entirely new markets and opportunities and jobs that just years ago didn't exist. You look at social media influencers. That's a category that really didn't exist. And it certainly didn't exist like it does today until we started putting camera sensors on the front of your mobile phone. When we started putting camera sensors on the front of your mobile phone, it became much easier to record yourself doing things. And that created that market opportunities to create jobs around social media influencers. So I would argue that's a technology shift. Technology going from expensive and scarce to inexpensive and abundant, which then drove all of these new opportunities, new industries. And I think generative AI will do that same thing. It will certainly replace some of the things that we had spent a lot of time doing, but it will open up new opportunities at the same time.
I love it. So let me get a read of the room. Who here would say that they're familiar with AI or feel like they could explain what AI is, just high level? Like who? There's no wrong answer, obviously. I just want to see who. So then on the other extreme, who's like, I keep hearing about it. I don't know what it is, what it does. Show of hands that are really like, don't have a take at all. All right. So everyone is at least passingly familiar. So Shawn, I think, we want to, I think you and I could have a lot of fun talking for hours about the implications of how this is changing culture, how it's changing technology is always impacted, like it's chicken egg of do people change technology, do technology change people? It's always both. But as it relates to academia, like some of the concerns that I hear is that it's too much of a good thing. There's too much information, too easily accessible. How do we either unpackage or demystify those concerns that like, how can something that's generating so much knowledge and so much stored information possibly be a bad thing?
Yeah, so I think it's key to recognize what generative AI is, and it isn't data retrieval, it's data prediction. It's predicting what the next word should be or what the word after that should be. And those models have gotten better so that we can predict longer series of words. And we could run an experiment right now. If I were to say, once upon a blank, what would you say that next word is going to be? Time, right? We pretty much all agree the next word is going to be once upon a time. And we could go forward with what the next word, out of that is. If I said, for breakfast, I like to eat a bagel with cream cheese. So there you guessed two words, right? You predicted cream and then you predicted cheese. And so that's what generative AI is doing. It isn't looking into a database that has all of Shawn's preferences for breakfast and saying this is the right one. It's predicting based upon, and it's driving a consensus. So I think you have to recognize the information that it's delivering isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. It's a prediction about what it thinks that answer should be or could be. It's one of the reasons why ChatGPT is horrible at telling jokes, because you often have to start with the end. You have to start with the punchline and work backwards. And ChatGPT and generative AI models don't work backwards. They only work one direction. They work forwards. Now, we may solve that problem. We may figure out ways of solving that problem. And there's some really interesting things we're doing now with generative models. But so I think first you have to kind of start with what it is that it's delivering. And then I think you need to look at the intersection of academia and education, especially K through 12 education. I would argue in college and in graduate school, you are challenged to think outside the box. K through 12, you are less challenged to think outside the box. You're challenged to to define the box, to describe the box, to make sure you understand how long the sides are of that box. And so I worry most about K through 12 education. At least here in the US today, we have one of the best higher education systems in the entire world. So we're still far ahead. When you look at K through 12, I think the challenges are more acute. And there, I think you do need to redefine what education means, because there's so much focused on memorization, on retrieving information, and that's where AI is very good. It's very good at matching correct answers with questions. It's very good at, predicting what the answer should be. And so I think that what we're teaching at K through 12 needs to evolve. And I think there's ways that we can do that. Like writing a book report, K through 12, we probably all experienced that in high school. Here's a book, read it, write a report on it. Now we see these generative AI models are very good at doing that, or very good at analyzing the characters, or very good at, certain things like that. And so I think the challenge that academia has is I can't assign the same assignment that I have assigned for, in some cases, 100 years. Like some of this hasn't evolved in 100 years. Here's the book, write a report on it. Here's the book, analyze the character. I think, one simple way is flip that upside down. Here's the book, have generative AI write a report on it, and then have the students analyze that report. Is this accurate? Is this right? Do I believe this? Do I think they characterized the main character in the right way? Because that's the skill set that we need in a world infused with generative AI, is being able to decipher what's right and what's wrong. And nowhere is that more apparent than with deep fakes and looking at the ability to create synthetic media that mirrors a real person. We have to be able to discern, is that accurate or not? Is this useful information or not? Is this good information or not? And so I think as a teacher, K through 12, as a professor in higher ed, the challenge is to rethink the curriculum, to rethink what you've been doing, and making sure that you're developing skill sets that match where the technology is going. And I think, that's the big challenge that we face today.
Yeah, I think, when I read about the concerns, you bring up such a great point, because it puts the emphasis back on the end user, as opposed to the technology having its own personality and being the bad guy. It's up to the consumers of the information and the teachers to maybe start thinking outside the box and understanding, how do we rethink learning? So for where my mind goes is, one might argue that the system has always been balanced or imbalanced by people that are just good test takers or have a very strong ability to memorize things. I certainly know in my day in K through 12, if you could memorize the material for the test, you could do very well, whether you retrieve the information or not. And interestingly, the classes that I still remember to this day were the ones where that wasn't the emphasis. And we had to do some thinking. We had to be able to account for the information that we were processing. It was less regurgitation and more kind of engagement with the material. I feel like AI on a larger scale is kind of pushing us toward that, like culturally.
Yeah, and I would argue that AI will make classes much harder, because you can't just memorize. And I think there are times where you do want to memorize, but you also have to make clear why memorization makes sense here. This is a conversation I always have with my kids. Like, mental math still has a value, right? Being able to do math quickly in your head has some value in how you interact with the world. Being able to assess probabilities, assess problems, figure things out, that has some value in the world, even though there are robust systems that could duplicate that math at a comparable speed, or duplicate that math with some precision. But that cognitive capability is much more difficult to develop than just simple memorization. So and that's going to be difficult for the teachers as well as the students, is driving that cognitive capabilities that's really going to define it. And I think the other thing is you have to recognize what's AI superpowers and what should be human superpowers. So AI, we know, is really good at pattern recognition. It's really good at parsing large data sets and finding things that humans were missing. There aren't a lot of humans that are great at that. So there's not a lot of duplication there or overlap there. But if there are places where, you know, human superpowers are starting to get replaced by a superpower now developed by an AI system, I think that's where you need to start to evolve away from and to move away from. And we let AI do those things that it is good at, and we focus on, you know, other areas, many of which we haven't yet discovered, we haven't yet uncovered, and we haven't yet created a demand for, but that will come.
I mean, how much, in your opinion, Shawn, is this we already kind of highlighted how technology through history and your piece, which I recommend everyone go check out. You can go to 1455litarts.org, click on Movable Type, the state of the art issue, Shawn's article. There is this understandable concern with anything new and technology in particular, but I wonder, how much of this isn't really tech. It's anything that challenges paradigms and anything that makes us, whether it's teaching or learning or creation of content, anything that takes the expertise away from the gatekeepers is always frightening. So I'm beginning to think, just hearing you talk, like this is at once a less scary, but much broader issue that can't be addressed by just saying, understand the technology, use it to its best use, and we'll be fine. I think there's a conversation we need to be having, like, worldwide, about what this all means.
Yeah, and I think you saw it with digitization, that point, Shawn. So digitization democratized a lot of marketplaces and disrupted the gatekeepers, if you will. I mean, you're the expert in music, but it used to be that, if you think about the economics of music, it was expensive to press music onto a physical item, and then you had distribution limitations. It was difficult to know what music people would like in which markets, and so rather than trying to guess, you would put 12 to 14 songs on a physical media, a CD or a record. I don't need to explain what a record or a CD player is, do I? CD tape. So then you would send that same record, tape, to all the same retail stores. When we moved online, you could easily sample the music. You could decide what you liked. And that's where we saw the explosion of singles, right? And streaming today, you can listen to just what you want. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. And so it changed the role that record labels played. A newspaper was nothing more than a combination of a bunch of different articles. It was the sports section, it was the comic section, it was the national news, it was the global news, it was the financial news, because it was much easier to deliver all of the news, the same news, to every household, rather than only delivering the sports page over here, only delivering the finance news over here. Global news goes to this house. So economics drove content and ultimately the distribution. But then over time, when we can just go find our favorite writer online, we can just read the news that we want to read. We saw if you will, a democratization of choice with respect to that. And so I think AI, especially generative AI, will have that same influence on different markets, some of which we're just trying to figure out now. We don't know which markets will break down, but we do know that markets definitely will break down. I can give you one example. So John Deere, for 100 years, maybe longer, has been selling tractors to farmers. And they sell tractors to farmers based upon their cost to make a tractor plus some margin. So they, if it costs them $10,000 to make a tractor, they sell it to them for $12,000. They keep $2,000 profit. But now, using artificial intelligence, they have put cameras on their equipment. And so they have something called the See and Spray, which is a 120-foot wide boom tractor that sprays weeds through a field. But it uses the cameras to identify the weeds. So rather than spraying the whole field with pesticides, it only sprays the weeds. And it captures 2,000 square feet of space every second as it drives down the field. Last year, they ran it over 1 million acres. They saved 8 million gallons of chemicals. But rather than just sell it to a farmer, they're now selling it on a per acre basis. So the whole economics to that market has changed. Rather than buying a tractor at cost plus margin, you're now leasing a solution at $4 an acre, because that's what they're charging. And so John Deere is able to, using artificial intelligence, extract more of the value out of the field, out of the farmer. And so the technology is driving value from the farm to the corporation, and in some ways perhaps bypassing the farmer. I mean, I think we'll figure out where that equation nets. But that's just one example of the market breaking apart because of artificial intelligence. That's obviously computer vision and machine learning, so it's a little bit different than generative AI that we're talking about today. But that same thing is going to happen. Markets will be broken apart by what happens in AI.
Jump in.
Yeah, no, we hear you great.
By how much concern is happening outside, I think, the Western world with respect to this issue of generative AI reinforcing very much American Euro-centric values. Because if these models are predicted based on patterns of thought, patterns of markets that are established, in sort of the core, right? What does that mean for the periphery? And is there a way to imagine an AI that gives voice to people that are outside of both the Western civilization, but even within the marketplace? So you think about, I have a phone that tells me how to get from point A to point B. I don't question it. I don't ask why it's telling me to take Route 7, but there might be algorithmic reasons that I'm not controlling or even aware of that are guiding me in a certain direction that may be market oriented. And so it really opened up a lot of questions about the degree to which we can look at this technology as being truly value-free and democratizing, or reinforcing assumptions about the world that we live specifically in the United States. And I not heard that until I got outside of the boundaries of my little world here. And I was kind of taken by how much concern there is, at least in pockets outside of the US.
Yeah, so I'll make 2 points. First is technology and innovation in particular is iterative. So while we look at it as a snapshot in time, it is continuously evolving. I like to think about technology creating both positive externalities and negative externalities. And so we tend to try to solve those negative externalities and reinforce the positive externalities over time. I am optimistic on humans in the long run trying to get things right. And so like one example of that I like to give is spam. The younger people in this audience won't remember spam like the rest of us in this audience will. It inundated our inboxes, right? And email democratized communication. It made it very inexpensive to communicate with people anywhere in the world. And so we saw an explosion of email. And this is what happens with technology. When technology goes from expensive and scarce to inexpensive and abundant, then we use it widely. We deploy it everywhere. So email got deployed everywhere over time. We used it widely, and our inboxes got filled with spam. And then over time, we figured out using AI, this is machine learning, how to solve for that negative, what was a very big negative externality. Now, the older people in the room, us included, will all remember going through our spam folders to make sure nothing good got caught inside of that spam filters, because the spam filters weren't very good in the beginning. But over time, they got better. And now none of us check our spam folders. I know I don't. And I presume if your email ended up in my spam folder, then you did something wrong. And so there's this iterative nature that happens. We are just in the very first chapter of generative AI. And what it has shown is exactly what you noted, is a general use case. And it does show a bias towards English speaking. It does show a bias probably towards an American-centric view, but that's not the end of it. And I think that we will develop additional models. I've seen prototypes of generative AI models that just use the information on your machine. So we can build models as small as just your laptop, and you can have a conversation with the documents that are stored on your laptop. So you imagine from historical documents or literature documents, you could say, build me a generative AI model that just looks at this piece of literature or these documents. We were talking beforehand, we could take all of George Washington's writings and make a generative AI model just from from that domain. And then the results you would get from a conversation with that generative AI model would be based just on the knowledge or information available from that. And so I do think that one of the negative externalities of AI is the biases that get embedded into the systems, and we're actively working to try to solve those. We haven't solved them all yet, but I do think that humans want to solve that for that issue, and we're going to want to figure that out. At the same time, it's colliding with historical legal structures that will impose its own influence on that. A case in point, when ChatGPT first was launched, I was working with some utility companies, and they wanted to rewrite their letters that they send out about rate increases. And I showed them how they could use ChatGPT and other generative AI models to rewrite those letters. And one of the fun applications was write it as Mickey Mouse. And so they wrote these letters in the voice of Mickey Mouse. And it was things like, well, golly gee, your rates are going up, and we feel so bad about this. Oh, shucks, but there's nothing we can do about it. Now, if you try to do that, it's blocked. It won't replicate Mickey Mouse's voice because Mickey Mouse, of course, is still owned by Walt Disney. And that falls within traditional copyright laws and regulations. So some attorney somewhere said, no more replicating Mickey Mouse's style. Is that good or is that bad? I think that's up for debate right now. Some would say it's bad. Some would say it's good. I took my own book and trained a generative AI model just on my own writing, and used my book as the basis for that. And so, I think we're still trying to figure those things out, but I do think that we will see an explosion of generative AI models that pull from different pieces to help us overcome some of the limitations that we see today, especially this around, specific markets, whether they be geographic, whether they be time series, different things like that.
I do want to make sure as we go through, if anyone has thoughts or questions, just shoot a hand up. So something I want to dial back to something you mentioned earlier, and the key word that came to my mind when you were talking about the democratization and the ways technology kind of forces change, often positive, is the whole notion of curating content. And it really has given, whether we're talking about data or just technology and innovation, the notion, I loved your example of whether it's news or music, like we can curate our own content. And 15 years ago, that was an unheard of, so there was an expense involved in that. There was a waste of time. There was a waste of energy. I think that's a crucial way to unpackage how these things that are presented as wholly negative. At worst, they're very complicated and complex, but I think there's like a societal, or the articles I read, maybe because they're not tech savvy, but I think there's more going on there, that this immediate assumption that it's all bad and it's all going to be limiting freedom, I think a very compelling case could be made for the opposite. You've already done it to a certain degree, but I'd love you to expand a little bit on kind of the liberating possibilities of how technology in general and AI in particular is enabling choice and curation and maybe eliminating waste and expense.
I think what generative AI does well is it creates discovery. So it's finding new things that I didn't know. One of the superpowers for AI is 100% summarization, taking a long document, summarizing it, and then being able to have a conversation with that document. So, if you took an academic paper that was dense and that you couldn't comprehend, or you weren't sure if you were catching the right points, then generative AI can help augment your skill set and push you forward. And so there is this ability to gain new insights that you might have missed, discover new information. If you look at like the algorithms that a Spotify uses, it's all about driving new discovery based upon past patterns and past things that you've enjoyed. So if you've listened to this type of music, then here's other music that you might like. And I'll start to infuse these new musics so you can discover new music that you may like. So I think that discovery is a key piece. And if you look at how Amazon is using it, they're taking hundreds of thousands, in some cases, of reviews on a product, and they're summarizing it. So now if you go to Amazon.com, you can just read the summary. Kayak has a new beta in their Kayak platform where you might say, hey, give me hotels around the White House, and it will then list a couple of hotels. And then you might say, okay, now give me boutique hotels, or give me hotels that have a swimming pool. And so it's helping you discover new opportunities that you might not have considered just looking at a list of options. So I think, what the democratization is really around discovering new opportunities. And when it comes to, finding writers that you like, finding books that you might like, I think that's an interesting use case, is discovering new options. I think we haven't really fully unpackaged all of the negative externalities. I don't think we know them all. And if you look at the mobile phone, we didn't know what negative externalities were going to be created there. And especially with social media, we didn't know what all the negative externalities were going to be. We're discovering some of those now, today. The research has become quite clear that it's detrimental to mental wellness, especially with younger people, especially with females. And so I do think you see companies starting to pay attention to that and starting to change the way that they do things. You've seen them remove you can remove likes if you want. And so the things that they think are reinforcing those negative externalities, they're trying to create some choice, or and sometimes remove them. We're not there yet. I don't think we're all the way to where we should be, but we're seeing the negative externalities and we're trying to address them. I think the same thing will happen with generative AI. We'll see the negative externalities and we'll try to address them. I think that one of the things we need to worry about is we can't see it from the historical view. And I worry that education says, well, look, now they can just write a report from the book. And that's a negative externality because it interferes with the way I've always taught this curriculum. And so they have to say, okay, generative AI can do what I have always assigned. I need to assign something different. I need to come up with something new and unique that leverages AI and allows the students to augment their skills, but also challenges them to develop cognitive capabilities that they didn't have.
Once, Nathan, I'll call on you in a second. I wonder, and I don't want to reduce this, I've already kind of reduced it down, but I mean, the more I hear you talk and the more I think about it, this isn't the answer we're looking for, but some of this, it just keeps circling back to resistance to change, full stop. Resistance to change, whether it's student behavior, especially teacher or expert behavior, there's always going to be a pushback if someone has to learn new skills or figure out new ways to do familiar things. So I offer that up just to say a grain of salt in terms of the alarmist rhetoric, because some of this is just this means I have to do something in a different way. And I think there's always going to be a natural pushback.
I think the other thing to recognize is the rate of change with technology is often faster than everything else. So technology moves faster than product, product moves faster than business, business moves faster than industry. So we're at the front of this force where technology has moved faster than anything else in its path has been able to change. And so the next 24 months, I think we're going to see a tremendous amount of change as, and we're seeing it with product now. Technology moves faster than product. Products are starting to change, but businesses haven't yet fully changed. Institutions haven't fully changed. Industries haven't yet fully changed. And that will come because of the spark that we saw with technology. Nathan.
So you brought up this this book, and I want to probe that. I actually something going on. It's a little bit of a focus on the loop, right? This sign of care about. So that kind of example doesn't tell me I should change, right? Or in fact, it wasn't an idea. That's how they learn something. Well, point is well taken that I could craft that assignment with an AI, but I actually don't see the need for it. I'm not sure why the AI, other than the novelty, is engaged. And I'm thinking as a creative person, as a writer, think about offloading that creative process and think about like the idea of AI and actually your nice description of AI as a predictive model makes serious. That's the very definition of writing something derivative, uncreative. It conforms to whatever context, isn't surprising, isn't interesting. So I wonder if you could just comment on some of these negative externalities related to creativity and work, the mental work you left to go to learn new, difficult, interesting things. Kind of maybe some of the risks of AI, maybe if you see any ways that AI is help that process.
Yeah. So, and I think we're still on the very early cusp of figuring out where it's good and where it's harmful. And I think it will take some time for that to play out. I think the risk is we assign something to students because we want them to develop some techniques or some skills or some cognitive capabilities. And if they can easily replicate that without developing those skills, techniques, and cognitive capabilities, then the assignment hasn't achieved the objective. Your point is well taken that if they had a generative AI model write the report, then and that report isn't as good as what they themselves would create, then they haven't replicated the the assignment. And that might be what 100% they've missed out on the opportunity. And that's why I worry more about it K through 12, because they don't realize the risk of missing out on that. And this is one of the challenges with technologies. And to me, one of the negative externalities of technology is that we don't wrestle with ideas like we once did because we had more time that was vacant from all other things in our life, right? I mean, I've known Shawn for a long time, and I imagine his writing style, his writing technique hasn't changed, right? You're probably still using yellow pads. And part of that is to induce an environment where he has to wrestle with the words, and he has to, and you look at even like great comedians, Seinfeld writes out his jokes and wrestles with them before they ever get typed, before they ever get delivered. That used to be a byproduct of the way we gave assignments, because they had no tools that could replicate work. They had no tools that could replicate cognitive exercise. My concern is that especially K through 12, they'll bypass that because they don't see the need. Why would I bother to learn that when this machine can do that for me? Yeah, or better than me, right? And so we need to give them assignments that still force an environment where they're developing cognitive skills, because it's more apparent than ever that those cognitive skills are what's going to drive them, drive success in the future, or give them a placement in an economics, environment and economic society. Don't be quiet.
That feels like an uphill battle to create that very good environment to thrive. Maybe new ways that accommodate some of the AI developments that still have people who are thinking, very engaged and stuff. It feels like an uphill battle against the algorithm that wants you to have made product quickly so that they might data and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is an uphill battle, but learning is also an uphill battle. And, I think finding creating economic value is an uphill battle. Like all of this is going to be challenging. I'm less concerned that the technology of the day is seemingly controlled by companies like Google and Meta and Amazon, because we know that leadership within any market segment has changed over time. Now, it could be that this time it's different and that these companies won't ever falter, and that their access to data and to AI models and to, powerful computing chips will provide buffers for them, that they never will be defeated. And certainly there are many in government agencies today that believe that to be the case. And so they're using traditional laws like antitrust to address that. But I guess I'm less concerned about that for a number of reasons. One, because I think large companies get big and they get slow and they struggle to stay up. Amazon's mantra and Jeff Bezos's mantra always was day one. So in his very first letter to shareholders in 1997, he writes, "This is day one for the internet, and if we execute well, day one for Amazon." And he included that shareholder letter in 1997 and all subsequent shareholder letters, stapled it to the back, figuratively, digitally, and reminded his staff that it was always day one. Because if it was day two, and he was asked one time, "What does day two look like?" He said, "It's death. It's slow demise. It's you always have to be innovating and creating, and you always have to be preparing like it's day one." And so I do think they will struggle. I also think around like generative AI models, Shenandoah University could have its own generative AI model. Like they don't have to be beholden to other tech companies. They'll have that developed here locally, and they'll get to choose the personas and the voices and the materials and all of these things. I can see a future where every class even could have its own generative AI model, that was embedded in the curriculum. Just like we can have it just for our own laptop, our own computer, we'll be able to use it there. So I'm kind of less worried about the big tech companies controlling us like a puppet, but we do need to recognize that algorithms are influencing us based upon our past behavior. And so we need to recognize that, hey, I don't want this recommendation in this part of my life at this time. I'm actually quite optimistic about younger cohorts because they don't view data the way older cohorts do. Let me ask for the students in the room, how many of you have an Instagram account or have had an Instagram account at one time? So all of you, I think, right? How many of you have deleted photos from that Instagram account? And why did you delete photos from the Instagram account? Now, if you were to ask older audiences, how many photos do you have of your great-grandfather? We might say 3, we might say 7, and we would never destroy of that object, right? Because it was scarce. But why have you deleted photos from your history? And would you say you've deleted, someone who's deleted a lot of photos? Has anyone here deleted all of their photos on Instagram and started fresh? We've got a couple here who have done that, right? Why did you do that? Right. Because
cringe in middle school is the answer.
Fringe in middle school, but I would argue there's a deeper view. What happened was the data that existed no longer aligned with what you saw as your identity. It no longer aligned with what you saw as yourself. And so you deleted that data so that the data then would align with who you are. And I think that is and I see it with lots of younger cohorts. Older cohorts would never delete data. We don't delete drafts, right? We save drafts. All of us can remember stressing over which draft to keep because we were out of space on our computer. And I'm like, I've got to delete one of these and I'm not sure which one to delete. Maybe I'll print it out, right? We would save, but younger audiences that recognize data is unlimited and can be easily replicated and replaced are fine deleting old things so that the data aligns. And if it's the algorithms are being delivered by the data and they're willing to cure or to cut off old data, then I'm optimistic that they will see that. But I do think it's very important that we recognize that algorithms are designed to drive us in certain directions. And if it's a corporation that's driving us in certain directions, at the end of the day, there needs to be economic value for them delivered at the end of the day. And that's often through a purchase, through subscription, through advertisement, through something else. And so you do need to be mindful of that. But I'm optimistic that younger cohorts are willing to try to move those algorithms so that they align with where they want to go.
Yeah, and just thinking about algorithms, everyone think about Spotify or however you stream music. Some of the concerns I heard initially were this is going to limit choice and who wants a curated playlist from Amazon or Spotify. And I think the options are always out there for ease of use in any scenario. And that's a fine option to pick from. That's like, exhibit A. But how many people in this room, nobody has the same playlists? And to me, that's the metaphor for how data and technology empower. And it's ultimately a function of how we're using it. So I think we can and should be cognizant of all the concerns. Like, are there big businesses that want our data and want us to influence our purchasing behavior? Of course. Are there ways that you can cheat or take shortcuts that hurt both students and the teacher? Of course. But on balance and over time, I think most of the people that were alarmist about Spotify are probably the biggest advocates now because they've seen in use case scenarios, I can curate all these playlists for free and I can share them. It's a very empowering tool.
Yeah, and the role changes, right? Because you can share those playlists, and so now you become a curator for an audience. At the same time, I think some of the risks, I wouldn't be an economist if I didn't give you both hands. Like, some of the risks are that we have fewer shared experiences because we're all having our own experiences. And we certainly see that with media. We see it extremely strong around politics, where we share our own, we've curated it so tightly that we're not always being exposed to alternative views. And that becomes even more pronounced when we leave a college campus and you're hearing less dissenting voices because you've curated the data around certain things. And so, but I see that as a negative externality that will that we will try to solve, because I think most people want to have those uncomfortable, dissenting, opinions. We want to hear some of the music that we don't like, so that we more clearly know the music that we do like. And so while we might skip it quickly, we're okay being exposed to it.
I think I see a line in the sand where, broadly speaking, the 20th century, the curation was done by the powerful. There was a handful of TV stations, a handful of newspapers, and so it was less complicated, and it seemed like black and white truth fiction. But the reality was, you were still getting a point of view. You were still getting a curated perspective from a moneyed interest. So again, on balance, I'd say there's more work that we have to do to sift through the good, the bad, the ugly, the fake. But once we're able to discern what's real and what's of value, we can get more sources of information, which I think leads us to a better place, kind of in terms of the knowledge we're accumulating. There's a couple of questions. I saw a couple of hands go up. You and then you.
Speaking of, I wasn't sure whether it was two-handed economist or one-handed economist. And you probably know the answer.
Yes. Yeah.
If you put 20 economists in a room and ask them the same question, predictive question about the economy 6 months from now, you get how many answers?
You'd get twice as many as you had people in the room, right? You get 40 answers.
But if you built a body of information about the function of the economy and asked AI 20 times the same question, would you get the same answer?
You might get the same answer. And so I think this is one of the challenges with generative AI. And generative AI, as you probably all know, isn't great at giving the answer, like giving, if you're wanting to use it in a useful, augmenting way, it's better to ask a generative AI model, give me examples of X, give me 10 options for Y, rather than what's the best answer for this. Because generative AI doesn't know what the best is. It doesn't know what the single truth is, because it's predicting what the answers should look like. So it isn't great at saying which couch should I put in my living room, but it would be good at saying which of these couches might fit in this space. And so it's good at giving options. It's good at giving, based upon the data. And this to me is one of the challenges today with generative AI, is that it feels like it's giving us one answer. It feels like it's giving us the only answer, the right answer. But we know that it's just predicting one of many different outcomes. And so, again, it's probability. So it's giving us, if we only ask it for one answer, it will give us the answer with the highest probability. But that's not necessarily the best answer. And so I think the way I use generative AI models is, give me 16 options for this. Give me 10 options for this. Help me think through this 5 different ways. Like, I will never ask it, what's the best answer for this, or what's the best option of this, because it doesn't understand best. It will give us an answer because it has been trained and programmed to always deliver an answer. And actually, you're seeing them push back on that now. I mean, generative AI, ChatGPT will be like, I don't know what the answer is. I can't speak to this. I can't answer that because you've asked me about something that I've now been programmed to not answer. But that's all being imposed by humans. So already we are seeing human preferences, some of it influenced by laws, decide what answers are, can be given, or what answers should be given. But it doesn't understand best. And so it might take all of that economic data and make a prediction with the highest probability, but we only know that, ex ante, here's the prediction, not ultimately what comes to fruition. And I think for humans, it's important to recognize that it isn't a foregone conclusion. What it predicts is just one of many possible scenarios.
media for like 20+ years now, and we're just getting to fixing these negative fixed factors. I was wondering if you think it makes sense for us to preemptively put in place restrictions for AI to prevent them from ever coming.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And ultimately that's a society question, not a technology question. I'm hesitant to do that because we don't know what the externalities are now, but I do think we need to keep a close eye on the externalities. And there are externalities that we will never, ever really, it could take decades for that. So as an example, if you step back to the 50s and you look at automation, some of the things we automated, dishwashing, laundry, and at the time, you might not have known what those externalities are. Now we can look at those externalities, right? One of the externalities of that, I would argue a positive externality, is that we have more women in the workforce. We have more women in higher education. There's 60% today of higher education is women, largely because in the 50s, we started to automate some of the skill set, some of the tasks that they were largely doing. And so, but at the time, you didn't see that as part of the conversation. People weren't saying, hey, put a dishwasher in every house, put laundry, washing machine and dishwashers in every house, and we'll drive women into higher education. Like that wasn't part of the conversations because we didn't foresee that. Now, when you look back at it, you're like, oh, of course, you automate some of these household chores and you're going to drive these outcomes. It seems so logical and so clear, but it wasn't part of the conversation. There are historians in this room. Maybe they can look back and say, but I don't remember seeing any articles from the 50s that said, beware of these technologies because it's going to disrupt the household. It freed up time in the household. And early on, that time was used other places. And then over time, that time began to be used for work outside of the household, and then also, aspirations towards higher education. So it could take 50 years for us to really see what AI opens up as far as opportunities go, as well as, what some of those negative externalities are. And I think it's important that as we identify those negative externalities, we address them quickly. Some of those have already happened, right? I mean, one would argue that, oh, we don't want these generative AI models copying copyrighted material. That stuff is already getting worked into, the system. And so we're addressing some of those concerns early on. And I think, we'll continue to iterate and it will continue to evolve.
Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? Young man in the back.
So as you can imagine, on college campuses, and we know this, we are having a lot of conversations. Not just, the initial reaction that we know is how do we prevent students from using this to cheat? I think we finally moved past that conversation a little bit. But now we're having conversations about, okay, so we want to make sure that our students are being exposed and given opportunities to interact with AI to prepare them for the life that they live after.
Yeah.
And yet, in the conversations we've had so far, one of the challenges that people are facing is what exactly students should be experiencing from an educator's standpoint. What should we try to teach? It seems that, as one of my colleagues put it the other day, it seems to be like trying to grab jello. Every time we think about it, let's create a course, or let's create a module that we can put in with AI across the curriculum. Every time we try to grab hold of what we should be teaching our students in this space, it's changing too rapidly. And I don't expect, a specific set of answers, but I'm curious from your perspective, from where you live, what would you recommend to educators, especially in the higher ed space, to be thinking about it, of what they should be doing with students to make sure that they are preparing themselves for the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think first we have to rethink what is cheating. Like, I think educators have a clear definition of, I give you an assignment. If you use, these resources, it's fine. If you use these resources, it's not fine. In the past, those resources you couldn't use were largely like, you can't use your peer, right? You can't use material that's already been published by somebody else without appropriately citing it. So like plagiarism was cheating. Borrowing another student's expertise was cheating, but it was relatively narrowly defined. And now generative AI comes on, and some say it's cheating. Some say it's lumped into here with plagiarism. Others say it's not. And so I think you have to figure out, where it sits. Now, when you think about preparing students for the world that they're going to enter, where AI will be infused into everything, it isn't cheating, at least yet, to use generative AI in a corporate setting. So plagiarism's still off the table, but generative AI, at least right now, isn't off the table. And most organizations, some are still trying to figure out, they're setting up their own AI statements and policies, and I do know some organizations that won't use it at all. They're worried about copyright violations, so they won't touch it for anything, internal or external. And others are saying, hey, we're infusing everything with AI. And so I do think you have to prepare a student for a life where AI is infused into their workflows and into their work product. And I think we're at a unique point in history where the students that are graduating now and over the next 4 years can come into the workforce with a superpower if academia has prepared them, where they really understand how to use it, where to use it, how it's helpful, where it's not helpful, where it's time saving, where it's not time saving. Like, if you could prepare a student to know where to use it, when not to waste their time trying to use it, and they could walk into an organization and be like, you guys are doing it all wrong. Here's how you do it. Here's where you want to think about it. I've already spent I spent years in school doing it this way or not doing it that way. Then I do think that they can be immediately valuable. And where they're immediately valuable, then obviously they're immediately employed and providing economic benefits. The problem is we don't know what some of those answers are, right? So it's going to require experimentation. And so I would be creating curriculum that is less focused on, here's what you need to know, X, Y, and Z, and more focused on experimenting. Like, let's experiment and let's come back and talk about what worked and what didn't work. Let's look at different options and figure out, was this a useful solution? Was it not a useful solution? And figure out. But, again, it's less binary and it's more an infusion of the technology into the final work product. So where does workflow change and how does that evolve?
But because this is the center authority, I wonder if maybe you could tell us a little about the philosophy. You also
Okay. So my line on where it's cheating and not cheating, I don't think of generative AI as cheating. I think that it supplants things that we were teaching, and we should move away from teaching in some of those domains where generative AI is clearly going to deliver a superior product or a superior deliverable. And so we have to figure out, how do we teach around that? How do we teach something new? How do we build off of the generative AI deliverable and push it even further? And I think there's a lot of opportunity. It will require us to think innovatively and creatively. And that's the part that makes me excited, because if we kind of have, generative AI plays a base in certain areas, and then we really are pushing to be more thought-provoking, more creative. Like, I just look at, and Shawn can speak to this too, just like how we never run out of creative ideas in music, right? We're coming up constantly. We can argue whether it's good outcomes or bad outcomes, but like artists today are being creative. They're being creative, around this, though, they're being creative within an economic model. So let me give you an example of this. If you go back to the 1970s and you look at the top 10 songs, all of the titles were multiple words of the top 10 songs. Fame, 1970, I think, or 71, when I looked at this. Fame is the only song in the top 10 for the year with one word. But you look now, all the songs are one word, because it's easier to find in a streaming environment if it's one word. And so all the words are one word. Songs are only paid if they stream for more than 30 seconds. So if you skip in the first 30 seconds, the artist isn't paid. So what do artists do? They jump right into the chorus. They don't give you this long interlude. They jump right into the chorus. Bohemian Rhapsody would never be created today. Now, we can argue whether that's a market failure or not, but it had a full minute of an interlude, and it's 5 minutes long, and so long that it was longer. It's shocking that it got played at all, even when it was created, because it had to be shipped on tapes. It couldn't be pressed on the single side of a 45 at that time, I think, because of the technology limitations. So Taylor Swift is a master at this, jumping you right into the chorus, hooking you right from the beginning, forcing you to get at least past 30 seconds before you skip so that she gets paid. Artists are putting more songs on an album, because we used to do 12 to 14 songs. That was kind of the limitations, physical limitations of the technology. Now we do 22 songs on an album, because the more plays, the more chances of that album going platinum or going gold. So they're creative, but they're creative within an economic environment. And I think, so we're constantly coming up with new creative ideas. I look at all of the writers who have been able to create their own platforms. Like, they've left the Washington Post or the New York Times, or they've left these places because they've become a name. They're no longer just an article. They're now the byline. And so they've created platforms, and they've gotten creative on how they're delivering the content, but they're doing it within an economic marketplace and an economic environment. So that was a long way of saying I'm excited for the creativity and the innovation that could come out of this. And that's where I would be encouraging students and pressing students is be experimental, be creative, be innovative, figure out something new to do, a new twist on this. So don't just take what generative AI gives you, but maybe use it to come up with something new and creative. So where do I use it? I use it all the time in everything. I will use it. I mean, obviously, I use it for copy edits. And I have a professional copy editor that I still use, but I will use it for just quick copy edits. Make sure this is, copy edit according to AP or whatever I'm doing, and hope that it catches most things before it maybe goes to a professional copy editor. And it has gotten very good at that. It's very good at following rules and, doing that. So copy editing, I use it there. I might use it to figure out, like, I've got a client right now, I'm writing, I write them a weekly newsletter for them. So I'll use it to come up with a title for the newsletter. The weekly newsletter each week has a different title. I'll feed in the text that I've written and say, give me six different title options. Rarely will I take one option as the answer, but it will give me an idea of, like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even think. So, like, in my last week, I was writing, it's for a trade association, and I write an economic article for them. And I was talking about the hot inflation numbers we had last week, and the weather and the weather was cold in January and warmed up in February, and that had an impact on some growth in economic categories. So one of the plays on that word was hot inflation, cold weather, and I was like, oh, I hadn't even realized that there was a play on these different temperatures. And so that's an interesting, what could I do with that? And so I use it as, in fact, the GPT that I created, I call Shawn's intern. And like an intern, interns are very fast, but not often right. They're good at getting you something quickly, but maybe it's not right. And so that's how I think of generative AI. Give me a quick answer. In fact, give me 10 quick answers. And then let that be part of my workflow and help me think of different things. So I could think of lots of ways, that you could use generative AI as part of an assignment workflow, right? You could have them feed in some text and get 5 different options and then write about those 5 different options, or have ChatGPT write about those 5 different options and then analyze those 5 different options from some other point of view based upon what you had talked about in class. So to me, it's part of the workflow. It's like the typewriter, it's like the computer. Both of those became part of our workflow. Email became part of our workflow. And I think that's how we prepare students for the future, is we make this part of their workflow and help them figure out, where does it make sense in my workflow and where does it not make sense in my workflow? And some of these things I'm still discovering where it makes sense. And I discover that through experimentation. And I'm sure everyone in this room who's used ChatGPT or other things like that, you're like, well, it's horrible at doing this, or it's really good at doing that. I'm less a fan of, there's this whole concept of prompt engineering, like writing the perfect prompt. I think that's totally misguided, because it's the sense that if I write the perfect input, then I will get the perfect answer, and there's only one answer. And so I think it's conversational. Just like I could give an intern, the perfect, if I'm going to take time and write to an intern, I might still get a bad answer. So I want to have a conversation. And to me, that's what generative AI is created to do, is have a conversation. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And I think it's happening at a time when this younger generation is more comfortable having conversations with computing environments. They're comfortable texting. I mean, I've been watching them all text all this whole time, right? They're all texting. They might even be texting. You guys texting each other? How many, for you 4 in the back, have you texted somebody who's sitting right next to you while we've been here? No? Why not? Haven't you shared a video, done something, shared? Okay, well, that was a bad example. But it's not uncommon, right? For you guys to be like sitting right next to each other and just say, oh, here, check this out. This is hilarious. And so did you guys share something over there? No? So, I think that, I don't even know where I was going with that point, but I was just trying to call you guys out. My point is that this idea of having a conversation with a computing environment is a much more comfortable experience for this younger generation. And they're coming at a time when that's going to be a much more common activity. And so I don't think that technology ever exists in isolation. I think it collides with societal shifts, and it collides with generational trends. And that's when technology really becomes impactful, is when it's happening at a time in history where generations are doing something or society is changing in a certain way, and then those collide. So
I think that's a mic drop, key takeaway, summation of the whole conversation. I'll just end my thought by saying, to bring it full circle and talk, what does that have to do with story and story? I think what we've learned tonight is that we've traced the history from hunting gathering to typewriters to 8-tracks and iPhones. The fundamental storytelling mechanism is a human endeavor. It's communication. So creativity, art, I don't think are going to be unduly impacted. It's a matter of how we're using this technology, and those that use it to their advantage and take advantage of the good and minimize the bad have better opportunities to learn, have better opportunities to engage, and perhaps expand the possibilities of originality and creativity. So I think on balance, what you're hearing here is that we're both very bullish on how we need to lean into technology and equip ourselves. Always be wary, always listen to the experts, but there's a lot of potential here, a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and let me just close with one story. So in high school, I had an art teacher who threw pots. She made pottery, but she didn't just make gorgeous pots. She made gorgeous pots that had been changed in a way. So she would throw a perfect pot and then she would push it off center, or she would change it, or she would cut it down the middle. And I asked her one time, like, why do you do that? Why do you change it? And she said, because I can already make a perfect pot every single time. I've been doing this now for decades. I can make the standard pot. What I want to make is something different, something unique. And I think that's our challenge as storytellers, is not just to take the basic story, but to figure out, how do I change the basic story? How do I do something different? And for all of us who watch any movies or TVs, it's clear that we need more innovation, more creativity, more storylines, like new endings, new plot twists. And my hope is that generative AI pushes some creativity and some innovation and nudges you in a direction. So as you use it, don't use it as the definitive truth, but use it as a jumping off point that says, what if? Like, what if I went further down this road? What if I didn't just stop there, but what if I went one step further and decided to change this story in a way that other people aren't expecting? I think that's the challenge as a storyteller. And if we can seize that challenge, I think the opportunities to be impactful are tremendous. Like, if you can take a story and change it in a way that people aren't expecting, I think there's some really awesome opportunity there for all of us.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. Appreciate the questions, appreciate the participation. Please join me in thanking Dr. Shawn DuBravac for being here, and please come back and check in with us in a few months.